In the first lesson, we considered that there may be many circumstances where a people or where the government might question the wisdom of a democratic state. In this lesson, I want to talk about some of the outcomes when the regime either decides or is encouraged by its own people not to adopt or transition to democracy. One way of thinking about this is to understand that there are different degrees or different levels of non-democracy. Consider the distinction between authoritarianism and totalitarianism. Authoritarianism refers to the types of states where the government wants to maintain firm control over the regime. It wants to maintain political power. But it doesn't really care so much about other aspects of the state or other aspects of the society. In an authoritarian regime, you're usually going to see certain levels of freedom of movement or certain freedoms of expression. You're probably going to see capitalism as the dominant form or some modification of capitalism as the dominant form of economic exchange. All of this will be allowed, that is, until a group or a number of groups decide to challenge the authority of the government, to begin to fight for or try to seize control of the regime. Once that happens, authoritarian states will often move in to repress the people and try to rein in those desires for control. Totalitarianism, on the other hand, it doesn't simply desire to maintain control of the regime. It actually wants to establish complete control over the state and all aspects of the state or the society. So to think about this practically, consider the differences between an authoritarian state like, say, Russia, and those of a totalitarian state like Iran, or maybe even better, like North Korea. If you look at Russia, what you're going to see is that its citizens are typically allowed to travel freely around the country or around the world with very little checks on movement. Russia allows private enterprise, although it does maintain control of certain state industries, like much of the oil industry. You're also going to see that inside Russia, there's going to be something like a free press and maybe even freedom within local elections. Compare that to Iran or North Korea, on the other hand. These countries place considerable oversight or considerable restrictions on the movement and the behavior of their people. They want full control. So if there are elections, they're probably going to go much further in controlling who gets to run for those elections or who gets to hold office. And in fact, they may simply appoint the leadership for all top posts rather than allowing even the image of democratic or popular participation. So now if you want to get even more complicated, you can think about this question of authoritarianism not simply of levels or degrees, but rather based upon what the goals of the regime are, or even how the government is organized. In the topology that you see on the screen, I have across the top 4 of the principal goals of authoritarian states. For example, you could look at a communist goal, where the ultimate goal is to seize control of modes of production so that eventually you can dissolve private property so that everyone in the state can be treated equally. Fascism, which is a desire to have some level of total state control or national control rather than controlled by the people. Theocratic, where the goal of the state is to create a religious state, like in Iran. Or a fourth one, which is rent-seeking behavior, which is to simply say the government is in power to collect rents to maintain their lifestyle at the expense of others. Down the left-hand side, I've also provided 5 of the most common means of organizing an authoritarian government. The first one, party elite, is basically where I have a party elite system, where I have one political party, and that political party tries to control everything. In an aristocratic elite, I may assume that there are members of society. Maybe it's religious officials, or maybe it's the educated officials, or maybe it's a landed elite. And these members of society should maintain goals, should maintain control. In a personalistic state, I might think there should be one main leader or a dominant leader, like you might see in North Korea, and that person is in complete and total control of the government. Whatever. So if I was thinking about any authoritarian government or any authoritarian state, I could ask, what are the goals of that state, and how is that state organized? And then I can compare it to other authoritarian states. So again, let's think about this question of China. China is a party elite state where there is one party, the Communist Party. And you could probably make the argument that the goals of this society or the goals of the government are communist in nature. But then again, you might also question whether or not it's really kind of a fascist state. And then use that to compare China to other party elite states like Vietnam or Cuba and to see what their goals are and determine how they may behave differently. Also consider a country like Iran. Iran is a theocratic state where the purpose of the government is to maintain religious leadership or religious authority. For that reason, we'd also probably call it an aristocratic elite. The aristocracy here are the imams, the religious leadership that ultimately maintains control of power. So what I would encourage you to do is to take a look at a set of countries, maybe countries you've been assigned for class, or maybe simply countries that you're interested in, and figure out how you would categorize them in this typology to make it easier to compare.